March 23, 1971, Perm Oblast, Soviet Union, 7 a.m. The taiga here was old in a way that resisted description. Spruce and fir pressed together in every direction. The forest floor dark even in summer beneath the canopy. The ground soft with decades of accumulated moss and needlefall. No roads reached this part of the Ural foothills without deliberate effort. No settlement of any size existed within a meaningful distance. The birds that morning were loud in the way birds are loud when nothing has disturbed them in a very long time. By the end of the day, there would be no birds at all. What was about to happen here had been planned for years, not in secret exactly. The Soviet state was not ashamed of what it intended to do. It was, in fact, proud of it. The project bore the name Taiga, and it was one component of a vast national program with the ambitious, almost poetic official title, the Program for the Peaceful Uses of Nuclear Explosions. The logic behind the program was straightforward, and to its architects it was not only sound, but visionary. Nuclear devices, detonated underground, released enormous energy in a controlled direction. That energy could move earth, fracture rock, redirect water. If the destructive power of the atom could be turned toward construction, toward the reshaping of geography itself, then the Soviet Union possessed not merely a weapon, but a tool of civilizational scale. The specific goal of Project Taiga was a canal. Soviet hydrological engineers had identified a problem of considerable strategic importance. The Caspian Sea was shrinking. The rivers that fed it, primarily the Volga, were being consumed by agriculture, industry, and growing urban demand faster than natural flow could sustain. The solution proposed by the state's most senior water engineers was audacious: redirect part of the flow of the Pechora River, which ran northward and emptied uselessly into the Arctic Ocean, southward into the Kama River system, which fed the Volga, which fed the Caspian. The geography required a canal of approximately 112 kilometers in length to connect the two river systems. Digging 112 kilometers of canal through the dense taiga of the Ural foothills by conventional means would take years and cost enormous resources. The chief engineer who had championed this approach had spent the better part of a decade arguing for it through every layer of the Soviet bureaucratic apparatus. He was not a reckless man. He had done the calculations. He had stood in front of committees in Moscow and drawn the geography on chalkboards with the confidence of a man who had measured the problem from every angle and found the solution elegant. The party approved the project. The funding was allocated. The physicists were assigned. The nuclear physicist responsible for the technical execution of Project Taiga had spent his career in the closed world of Soviet weapons development before being assigned to the peaceful program. The transition, in practice, was less dramatic than it sounded. The devices being buried in the Perm Oblast Taiga were smaller than warheads, but they were built on the same principles, by the same hands, from the same materials. His job was to determine the precise placement and depth of each charge, to maximize the excavation effect while minimizing what the program's official documentation referred to, with bureaucratic delicacy, as undesirable surface consequences. He had run the numbers many times. The surface consequences, he had concluded, would be manageable. The canal, he believed, would work. On the morning of March 23, 1971, 3 nuclear devices, each with a yield of approximately 15 kilotons, comparable to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, were detonated simultaneously at depths of between 127 and 167 meters beneath the taiga floor. The explosion was not visible in any conventional sense. There was no fireball. There was no mushroom cloud rising over the forest. What happened instead was that the earth moved. 3 columns of compressed rock and soil were driven upward by the simultaneous detonations, creating a line of craters along the planned canal route. Workers and observers stationed at a safe distance, or what had been calculated as a safe distance, felt the ground shudder beneath them in a single rolling wave. Trees at the perimeter of the blast zone fell. The birds, as noted, did not return. When the dust cleared and the radiation surveys permitted the first teams to approach the site, what they found was not a canal. The 3 detonations had produced 3 craters, arranged in a rough line, the largest approximately 500 meters in diameter and 15 meters deep. In the months that followed, groundwater filled these craters, merging them into a single elongated lake, roughly 700 meters long. It was, by any measure, a significant alteration of the landscape. It was not a canal. The alignment of the craters did not match the planned canal route with sufficient precision. The depth was inadequate for navigation. The connection to either river system that the entire project had been designed to create did not exist. Project Taiga had successfully demonstrated that nuclear devices could excavate large volumes of Earth. It had failed, completely, to produce anything that could redirect a river. The official response to this outcome was characteristically Soviet in its construction. The project was not declared a failure. It was declared a partial success, a proof of concept, a technical demonstration of the excavation potential of simultaneous underground detonations. Further phases of the Pechora-Kama Canal project would be evaluated. In the meantime, the data gathered from Project Taiga would inform future applications of the peaceful nuclear program. The party curator, who had shepherded the project through its approval process, stood before his committee in Moscow and delivered this assessment with the same measured confidence he brought to every briefing. He did not mention what the radiation surveys had shown. What the radiation surveys had shown was that the surface contamination around the crater site significantly exceeded the levels that the pre-detonation models had predicted. The simultaneous detonation of 3 devices at relatively shallow depths had vented radioactive material into the soil, the groundwater, and to a limited degree the atmosphere, at levels that the program's own safety parameters had not anticipated. The lake that formed in the merged craters, which local people with the dark humor common to those who live near things the state does not discuss, eventually began calling the atomic lake, was measurably radioactive. The surrounding soil carried contamination that did not diminish at the rate the models had suggested it would. The taiga, which had been expected to recover within a defined period, recovered more slowly and less completely than projected. None of this information was published. The peaceful nuclear program continued. Between 1965 and 1988, the Soviet Union conducted more than 150 underground nuclear detonations classified as peaceful, in gas fields, in mining operations, in seismic research, in further canal and reservoir projects. The Taiga site was left as it was, a contaminated lake in a remote forest, accessible only with deliberate effort, largely unknown outside the agencies that had created it. The Soviet Union ended in 1991. The peaceful nuclear program ended with it. The documents relating to Project Taiga were partially declassified over the years that followed, releasing enough information for researchers to locate the site and understand broadly what had occurred there. What the documents did not resolve, and what remains unresolved, is the full picture of the contamination. The lake exists. The radiation exists. The rate at which the surrounding environment has absorbed, dispersed, or retained the radioactive material deposited in March 1971 is not fully known, because the monitoring that would have produced that knowledge was never conducted with the consistency or transparency that the question required. A researcher who visited the site in the years following partial declassification described the experience with a particular precision. The lake itself was unremarkable to look at, still dark, surrounded by the taiga that had grown back with the patient indifference of forests. There were no signs, there were no fences, there was no indication, visible from the lakeside, that the ground beneath the water and the soil surrounding it carried the signature of 3 simultaneous nuclear detonations from half a century earlier. The Geiger counter he carried told a different story. The readings at the water's edge were elevated, not at levels that would cause immediate harm from a brief visit, but elevated in the way that reminded him, with clinical clarity, that the lake was not simply a lake. It was the permanent record of a morning in 1971 when the Soviet state attempted to build a canal with atomic bombs, failed, and left the evidence sealed in water and soil for the taiga to keep quietly, indefinitely, without any sign to warn the uninformed that the ground here remembers what was done to it.